Thank you. Ask Drain to do the opening karakia, please.
Kia ora. Tuia Kuranga, Tuia Kararo, Tuia Ki Roto, Tuia Ki Waho, Tuia Tātou Te Tangata, Ki Te Kaupapa o Te Huinei, Ki Te Kaupapa o Te Ranginei, Mauri ora, Kia Tātou Katoa. Bind above, bind below, bind within, bind beyond, bind us the people to the purpose of our meeting, to the purpose of this day, breathe life into all of us. Kia ora.
Kia. Thank you, Drain. Well done. So, yes, welcome everyone. Apologies for the few-minute late start. Just a few reminders that the meeting is being recorded, will be available on YouTube, Council's YouTube channel within a few days. Microphones muted unless speaking, and hands up for questions, please. Zoom attendees to turn off camera and microphone during breaks. The toilets and the fire, I think everyone in the room knows where they are, so we don't need to cover that this morning. The media are present. Pretty sure I saw Catherine up there. And so with that, I'll move to apologies. Is there any? No apologies. Declarations of interest. Appears to be none. Public forum, there is none, which brings us to reports. Nelson Tasman Joint Submission on the Government Policy State for Land Transport 2024 in the name of Neil Lindsay, and has been circulated to members separately. Neil, when you're ready.
Good morning, everybody. So decision today is whether to approve the RTC submission to the Government Policy Statement for Land Transport. We did a workshop with the RTC a couple of weeks ago, and we have circulated the draft submission to councillors last week. I've not received any written feedback, but I acknowledge there might be some verbal feedback that elected members might have heard of. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and we can make any changes to the submission if you would like.
Thank you, Neil. Any comments, questions? Mayor Smith.
Firstly, can I thank staff for putting this together? It is consistent with the workshop discussion that officers had, and we're given the feedback. There has, and I've circulated it to Nelson City councillors. I don't wish to make any changes, but I would, just as a matter of record, note that two councillors indicated they were not supportive of the priority that were given to the Hope Bypass, Councillor Stallard and Councillor Sanson. And so just for a matter of record, put those on record, but the members of the Regional Transporter, which this is a submission on behalf of, do support it. It reflects the view of the workshop, and happy for it to proceed, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Do we have anyone on Councillor O'Neill Stevens?
Kia ora, yeah, and appreciate I was an apology for this workshop. I've sent through some feedback to council staff, although I appreciate it's relatively late in the piece. So unless any of these have universal agreement, I'm happy to be the dissenting voice on the submission itself, but just want to get these on the record. Particularly, I share that view around the prioritisation of the Hope Bypass. I think that solely prioritising it's out of step with the intervention hierarchy. I'm particularly supportive of the hypothecation of the traffic infringement fee revenue to the NLTF to support the Road to Zero safety program, and I think that's a great step. Although what is also in the GPS is the dismantling of the Road to Zero as an activity class, which I don't support. The indicative strategic priorities engagement paper that MOT released, I think early 2022, signaled that emissions reduction should be the overarching focus of this GPS. I'm disappointed that that hasn't come through, and I think it's a major missed opportunity. And then on the other aspect touched on in our submission, which is around the fuel excise duty and road user charges, I just want to, I'm supportive of the staged approach, particularly with the supplementary direct Crown funding to mitigate the significant increases in that, and just note that those revenue sources have stayed flat since 2020, and I think it's appropriate to now start increasing those again, and is consistent with the overarching aims of both the previous GPS and the 3, if not 4 or 5 or 6 before that. So unless there's anything in there that people go, yep, no debate, let's just copy and paste and put those in, I'm happy to for the submission to go through as is, and I can just be the dissenting voice there.
Right, so just in relation to the matter you wanted to copy and paste, just run that past us again. What was that directly related to?
Sorry, which one?
Oh, you just, at the end there, you said we could copy and paste some.
If there were any in there that had a wide degree of support, I know a couple are obviously contrary to what was workshopped, but
Right.
things like the hypothecation of traffic infringement fee revenue for the Road to Zero program.
I'm just conscious that might be quite a change from the submission as proposed. And
Could we just, Mr. Chairman, could we just ask staff, how difficult would it be at this late stage? Because I'm very sympathetic. We did have the difficult situation, Rohan, where we have to get it in today, and I'm sympathetic, but just how difficult would it be to add a sentence into the submission on the issue of hypothetication of the fine revenue?
It wouldn't be an issue. We can happily do that if that's what the RTC wants.
So I'm quite happy with the
just in relation to that one matter rather
that one matter.
Right.
On the other, can I just ask a question?
For sure.
And I'm just trying to be accommodating. Rohan, there's 2 ways of which the dissenting voice could be expressed. One would be just a note in a minute, in the minutes of the meeting, that yourself and some other councillors had a different view on the Hope bypass and the other questions you raised. Or was your preference to have a comment in the letter that comes from the 2 mayors to note that there were some dissenting opinions? Because I'd prefer, if we could, to have the Regional Transport Committee adopt the report. It's just a matter of how we accommodate that, Rohan. Any thoughts?
I'm easy either way. And I know that these views have been expressed in other submissions. So I'm confident that the voice will be coming through to through on the GPS submissions in any case.
So yeah, I think well, personally, I'd like to keep the regional land transport submission as clean and as concise as we can without muddling those other things. And perhaps we can make that note of that in the submission from the 2 mayors.
So why don't we proceed on this way, if Rohan would be comfortable, that we ask officers to add a sentence and let them draft it with the approval of the chair, and that the chair have the discretion to finalise the wording on the sentence around the hypothetication, and that the minutes of the Regional Transport Committee note the dissenting view on the priority given to the Hope bypass and the issue around, I think it was the ruck and the Fed, Rohan. Correct. And that they be noted in the minutes that there was a dissenting view around those.
Happier with that, yeah.
Would that be a way forward?
I think that would. Rowan, are you
Yeah.
comfortable with that? Sorry, Councillor O'Neill. So we've got a couple, 2 or 3 hands up now. I'll come first to you, Bill, and then Emma, and then Councillor Dale.
So I've just seen Rohan's email, and one of the things in there that maybe we haven't covered was the not supporting dismantling of the Road to Zero, which we may have an opinion on. The committee may have an opinion on.
Did we express a view in the submission on Road to Zero as it stands? I don't think we did.
We didn't know.
No.
We did have a discussion at the workshop. I'm not a fan of Road to Zero. My view is that it is unrealistic. And I'm just not into setting targets. My view is for as long as we have motor vehicles on the road, there will be some accidents. We should be prioritising reducing them. And so happy to note there's a difference of view, but because there are differences of view, I prefer we were silent.
Yep, same, agree. Now, Emma, you did have your hand up, but you appear to have got, oh no, there you are, sorry. You're all good, ready to go. Emma.
I hope she is in the countryside in the beautiful spot that she's showing off to us.
It is my own photo, but I'm not currently here. I'm in my office. So a couple of things from me. I'd definitely support the adding of the support for hypothecation into the system, because that's it is a shift, and it's a really significant one that will support sustainable funding as well for the Land Transport Fund. On the road to zero, the one thing I'd note is that, and I think there's plenty of divergent views around the country on road to zero itself, but the actual target that we currently have under that strategy is a 40% reduction in deaths and serious injuries by 2030, and that is certainly that is something that we know from international evidence is achievable, and that is when we look at, for example, the State Highway 6 safety benefits, where we've had a 75% reduction in deaths and serious injuries since we changed the speed limits. There are some quite significant things that we can do within a reasonable time frame that will have an impact on the reduction in deaths and serious injuries. So I'm not, I'm obviously, as a Wakatai representative, we will give effect to that strategy up until the point at which it's changed, but the actual intermediate target is certainly one that we know is achievable. And thirdly, on the Fed and ruck, I think there's an important balancing issue in here that not increasing Fed and ruck will mean that the GPS, the draft GPS as presented, is not balanced, i.e. we won't have enough revenue to achieve the targets that are set out in the funding, the 10-year funding pathway. So if the committee is going to say that they do not support increases in Fed and ruck, they actually need to also accept that that means that those funding targets will not be able to be met unless other revenue is provided. And given the latest information in pre-fu, that might be quite challenging. So the other option is that there will be less overall revenue into the National Land Transport Fund, and those funding trajectories would have to be adjusted. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that by not putting increases back into Fed and ruck, those other things that you do support, such as the increased investment and maintenance across the local road and state highway networks, won't be able to be achieved at the level that's been forecast. So that was
Thank you for that, Emma.
3 points.
Come to Councillor Dowell and then Mayor Smith.
Yeah, just my concern about the Hope bypass being wanting to be noted to be removed or whatever. Where does that put the Rocks Road situation as far as the Nelson City is concerned?
Well, Nelson, I'm happy to answer that. There are different views within Nelson City. I am very supportive of the Hope bypass. What we've resolved is to keep the submission as is, but we are going to ask the staff to note in the minutes that there was a dissenting view by Rohan and reinforced by other councillors that are not on the Regional Transport Committee. I'm always looking for solutions, and I think it's really important that the Regional Transport Committee jointly between Nelson and Tasman particularly reinforces the Hope bypass. I was going to suggest on the solution on the road to zero, if there was willingness, having heard Emma and wanting to be clear on the submission, can I suggest we ask our officers to include a sentence that the Nelson Tasman Regional Transport Committee strongly supports the 40% reduction target in deaths and serious injuries, but there are mixed views on the Road to Zero slogan. Because I think that's a fair reflection and would make sure that we're covering the different views. There's no question of our commitment to the decline and the improvement. It's just some have doubts about it.
True.
And I think that accommodates both the concerns that Emma has had and Rohan had, and I certainly would be very comfortable with that.
Same. Councillor Dowler, had you finished? I'm not sure if we left your float there or not. For the want of a better.
Yeah, it hasn't been answered, but we'll leave it there. Thanks.
Right. Okay. Councillor O'Neill Stevens.
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify around Road to Zero and my comment, which is around in the GPS, Road to Zero is not proposed to end, but to be split across the existing activity classes, whereas in previous GPSs, since Road to Zero has come into effect, it is set as its own distinct activity class. And just note that the review of the 2018 GPS that was released in this year highlighted the funding of activity classes as a key driver for change, which is where my opposition to the dismantling of the Road to Zero activity class comes from, but that the Road to Zero activity program actually isn't proposed to change beyond that.
Right. Thank you. Anything further? Rohan, anything further? He's not. Anyone else with anything further to comment? Dwayne?
Through the chair, yes, just noting that anticipating that there might be a tweak or two to the submission, we've included suggested a third resolution which delegates authority to the chair of the Joint Regional Transport Committee to make the final amendments to the submission, basically picking up the points that have been agreed in principle and recorded in the minutes. That's the detail, but that's submission to the resolution just to support that. And just to be clear, from what I understand, the hypothecation of traffic infringement fee revenue to road safety activity is one of those amendments. And I suppose it would be helpful to just get clarity on that last point around whether you want to say anything about the activity class being split for road safety. The other point we've got very clear is that you wanted to make a point clarifying that the committee is very supportive of reduction to death and serious injuries on the road, right, along with the 40% line mentioned before. So I just wanted to clarify that last point around.
My preference, and I think where the consensus is for our submission to endorse the 40% target on reductions in deaths and serious injury. I have a different view to the Deputy Mayor about the separate activity class. And the reason for this, it is this. Any road infrastructure improvements you do generally carry multiple benefits. When you do a road safety improvement, you often also improve the efficiency and those other elements of it. And so, look, I understand where Rohan's coming from, but it is not as much as possible, I'd like our submission to focus on those bits, particularly at this late stage. And so I think what I prefer it said was just that, strongly support the 40% reduction in deaths and serious injury, and note there are mixed views on the Road to Zero activity class and slogan. Is slogan the right word, or term?
Term. Yeah, term's probably better. Although it is a slogan, we can consider that one, I guess.
Yeah. And I just, what I will do is I would then like to move resolutions 1, 2, and 3, which then gives the chair to take on board those 2 amendments and get it endorsed. If that would be appropriate, Mr. Chairman, to move at this time.
Thank you. And I'm happy to second. Councillor Dowler, do you want to speak to the motion or something prior to that?
No, I was just going to second it.
Okay. Now I've already done that. But thank you. Does anyone wish to speak to the resolutions? Councillor O'Neill Stevens.
Yeah, just quickly, I think the overall direction of this GPS is positive, but where we have emissions reduction or transport emissions is our fastest growing source of emissions and our largest contributor to household emissions, I do think it's a missed opportunity to have that be the overarching theme of this GPS, as was signaled in early 2022. And I think particularly as that flows down into the funding of activity classes and prioritization within the GPS, I think we haven't got the balance right yet. In terms of our submission itself, I think we're a little silent on some of the key strategic shifts within the GPS, and I'm glad that some of those changes have come through. But I think that there's still an overarching theme of stepping over things like the investment prioritization and intervention hierarchy to push projects ahead of where they should be in an appropriate in the appropriate way for managing traffic demand and managing road safety. There's some really good stuff in here that I think we should absolutely support, particularly the future of the revenue system and the need to look at how we fund road transport. But for now, the proposed changes to road user charges and fuel excise, I think, is an appropriately managed step back into the continued process of increasing that revenue, as has previously been consistent, but that COVID threw a spanner in the works, and so I am supportive of that work. But when we look locally, I think that just prioritizing the Hope bypass over Rocks Road, I think fails to look at the integration of our transport system on a network-wide basis, where we need to be taking these steps together and shifting where our demand is if we want to actually address the issues of congestion and the impact on productivity, which won't be solved solely through the building of new roads. It needs to be addressed through a shift in demand, through modal shift, and Rocks Road is a great example of a project that would support that shift by providing safe walking and cycling access along one of our key arterials. And so I don't think we've got our submission quite right. I also don't think the GPS has got it quite right. So that's where I'm at today.
Thank you. Councillor Dowler, did you want to comment anything further?
Yeah, I do have a lot of fears about the future of the excise tax being collected and a change to road user charges. Being in that game for a number of years and knowing how easy it is to cheat the system, and then comments from the Waka Kotahi about how they are going to struggle to keep things up to date or chase people or whatever, it's a real concern. I know for a fact there are several places around New Zealand where you can pop your vehicle in and within 2 hours you can come back out with an electronic device that disconnects your electric speedo. And that is a total concern to me, because I can see that it will just become rampant. And you've only got to have a day a week where someone turns their speedo off, and that's a 20% loss in revenue in a working week. So that's a concern to me, knowing that it is already existing out there at the present time. The other thing is, talking about Rocks Road, Rohan, I would say we'd have the Hope bypass just about built by the time you guys get resource consent, because you're playing in a very, very hard area, and it concerns me completely. Plus, the design is going to have to take into account the sea level rise, etc., etc. So it's not just going to be a simple fact of matter of sticking a platform out at what you've got. It's going to have to go up at least 1.5 meters. We've had to shift one of our future infrastructure projects away from the sea because of that reason. So I just have concerns that, yes, I want Rocks Road to proceed, because unless you're going to come over with your little car and take boatloads of apples to the port every day, 24 hours, we're going to have major issues coming in the future. We ain't getting any smaller here over in the rural area. So the network has to improve. And if the network improves and stops the trucks idling for 20 to 25 minutes on the highway, waiting to get through traffic lights, etc., that gets rid of half the emissions. And that comes from the mouths of the transport operators. They reckon they burn more fuel waiting to move than actually moving in the track from Port Nelson through to Three Brothers Corner in Richmond. That's just my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll come to myself for some comments, then come to Mayor Smith for the right of reply before I put the resolution. There's no other speakers. So just firstly, I'd like to thank the staff for the work they've done on completing this submission, and elected members for their comments prior to today and today in relation to this. I think we've ended up in a reasonable place. Just to follow on from Councillor Dowler, we here in Tasman do see the Hope Bypass as regionally the most important and significant project. We are supportive of Rocks Road, but we're also concerned about the link in between where Rocks Road project finish and the Hope Bypass. We don't want to have a bottleneck there in the middle, so that's something we will have to address going forward. Earlier in the week, the Prime Minister and one of the Labor Party members actually visited Lower Queen Street, Gladstone Road, and I took the opportunity to point out some challenges we have, and even on midday on a Monday, it was quite busy and congested, so they could see for themselves just the issue we are facing. And it's not going to go away anytime soon. This morning when I come in for this meeting, traffic was backed up beyond to Three Brothers Corner, so that's at early peak, AM peak, and that seems to be getting longer, and the same for the PM peak. So it's a real bottleneck for the wider community and a real challenge for us to resolve. So with that, I'm supportive of the GPS and happy to make any minor amendments along the discussion we've had this morning. And with that, I'll come to the mover of the resolution, Mayor Nick Smith, to close with his right of reply.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm strongly supportive of this submission, being very focused on ensuring that our region gets significant capital investment from Whakakatāi. I note that each decade over the last 50 years, we have got a substantive investment in our highway network. We go back to QE2 Drive in the 1980s. Then there was the Richmond deviation in the 90s. We had Whakatū Drive delivered in the 2000s, and then the Ruby Bay bypass. Each of those were big chunks. We are at risk in this region of having a full decade at a time of growth of missing out. My view is that the Rocks Road project will not make any significant contribution to reducing congestion. I think it is a sign of the strength of the relationship between Nelson and Tasman that in the submission and in this regional transport committee, we're sending a clear message through the GPS that the Hope Bypass is the top priority for the region. I think that gives us the best chance of whomever is government to getting it to the top of the list. Appreciate the work that the officials have done at short notice in getting this GPS submission together. I just make one closing note, and that is we face a general election on the 14th of October. Regardless of whether there is a change of government or a change of coalition partners, there may be, I think it is quite likely, there'll be revisions of the GPS. But with this submission, we need to use every opportunity we can to advance the interests of the region. And with the support of the staff, this submission achieves that.
Thank you. So the resolutions are on the board or screen in your case, and I'll put the numbers 1 through to 3 all together. So all of those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Assuming no dissenting voices. Anyone against? Say aye.
No.
Thank you. Do you want your voice vote recorded, Rohan?
Yes.
Okay. Noted that Councillor O'Neill Stevens voted against the resolution, please. With that, I think that brings us to the end of the formalities, unless there's any other matters on the agenda. If not, I'll ask Dwayne to do the closing care, please.
Good. Now, this is a new one to me, so apologies if I don't quite do it justice. Kia hika te korero, kia wātia, kia mama te marawa o te tangata, kia o ki te ara mo tātou e ora nei, ko rongo ki runga, kia tīna, hui e tai ki e. Let the discussion be lifted, clear away and ease the hearts of people. Keep focus on the path of life. Peace is upheld. Say yes, bind together, and so it is.
Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you all for your attendance and enthusiastic input, and hopefully we'll get that submission away today.